He locked the door of his suite behind us and bade me sit down. I accepted the wine glass he offered, knowing without needing to taste it that the wine, a heavy southern red, was laced with Phoenix. I had been addicted to Phoenix 6 years ago, just as I had been addicted to Malcar. I had beaten the addiction and not taken Phoenix since. I was horrified by how comforting the taste was. I had known people in Farah who had insisted that Phoenix was tasteless, but they were wrong. It tasted like tears.
Listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome back to the Socialist Shelf. Jacob here with Lenore. How are you doing?
I'm good. Drinking from a wine glass that does not have Phoenix in it. We'll get into what that is.
Yep, thank God. Well, we have two guests on today. Super exciting. One of them's been on 5 times, so I don't know if I need to introduce her. We still will. We have Aysha U, Farah, 5-time returning guest.
Shadow co-host.
Yes, shadow co-host. And host of the My Maidens Podcast. And game writer, working on games such as Life is Strange, Double Exposure. And contributor to this new queer collection, Amplitudes. Super excited to have you on, Aysha. And excited also for our first-time guest, Lee Mandelo, having you on. Super excited. Lee's the author of The Woods All Black, Summer Suns, Feed Them Silence. He's the editor of Amplitudes, written a lot of really cool stuff. And Amplitudes is a new collection that we're really excited about. We're not talking about it as our topic today, but I do want y'all to know about it because it's new. It's 22 speculative stories about queer and trans futures that, again, Lee edited, Aysha contributed to with the short story Sugar Shadows. Super excited to have y'all on. Super excited to talk about this book. But yeah, thank y'all so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Before we get into this book, and it is a doozy, and I think it's going to be a great episode, I would love for y'all to talk about the new collection. I literally downtown Atlanta yesterday came across a pop-up market that was selling this book, and like the person working it was like, oh my God, I'm so excited to read this book too. We just got it in. Like, people seem pretty hype about it. So yeah, do either both of you want to speak to what Amplitudes is, what the project is, anything about it? Because it's pretty cool, and I venture a guess our listenership will be interested. I've told this before, but according to Spotify stats, almost a third of our listenership is non-binary, which is almost statistically impossible.
An achievement, though.
Incredible. No, I'm incredibly proud.
We're beating the odds.
Yes.
In this episode, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So it is, as you said, 22 stories, thinking about queer futurity in the like Jose Esteban Munoz sense. I get to open with an epigraph from him. I have a tattoo from Cruising Utopia, so it's really me getting to nerd out about like, what can we do with speculative fiction that lets us think about possible futures that are different from this one? And I think particularly in this collection, one of the things that I was looking at as the editor is not so much the like anodyne 2008 style hope and more, okay, but what do we do where we're at? How do we make community? How do we thrive even in difficult circumstances? How do we fight for something for ourselves or for futures for people who come after us? And so I think it does span a lot of different affective tones. We have some sweet stories and some that are pretty upsetting. We've got our, Christian fascist America in there a couple of times, that sort of thing. And also it covers, I think we ended up with 6 countries. It's a pretty transnational anthology. We have a couple of works in translation. from German writer Aiki Mira and also Taiwanese writer Dao Chi. So we've got some breadth, some depth, and also Aysha is in it.
Yeah, I'm both broad and deep. I don't know what that means.
Operating on
Yeah.
multiple axes.
When Lee first was talking about this anthology, and I was like, I really have something that I feel like I want to contribute, but the initial copy in the announcement, like it did sound very hope punky, and I was like, dog, this is not my thing. Like my stuff is pretty bleak. And you were like, no, that's good. Bleak is
You
good.
are a self-described edgelord.
I am an edgelord. Yeah, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I am a huge edgelord.
Yeah, I think,
as you can see from this book that I recommended that we read.
Yeah. I think one of the shall not be named sort of negative reviews that we did see, there are very few, with someone being like, I wanted this to be hope punk and I'm very upset. And I was like, well,
Good luck.
Good luck.
I hope that works out for you. You know what? You can read like every other trans futurism anthology, because everything that I like have considered, there's like, I think I got invited into like a solar punk anthology a few years ago, right after I had a story come out in Uncanny. And they were like, I read the description and I was like, I don't have anything to say about this. Like, because
Right.
I do not, because solar punk tends to be like, like optimistic future. What if, like that one cartoon, like advertisement for like
For yogurt?
for yogurt. And I just like, I'm sorry, dog. I am tired.
Mhm.
I don't have any hope punk in me.
It's like, what if Ezra Klein wrote science fiction?
Yes.
Yeah, abundance.
You know, I've always found like, hope punk has to be earned in a specific type of way, right? Like we covered Ministry for the Future on the pod, and it comes to a very hopeful ending through just some of the most grueling shit imaginable.
Mhm.
And it needs to be earned in a specific way. For me, I no accounting for taste, in a way that it's like, okay, I enjoy this because I saw the journey to get here. And it is colored by the sacrifice along the way, and it's not just kind of like, and then things were good. But if you like your sweet stuff, we won't take it from you. But also, you'll notice the things we've chosen
I
to
will.
cover on
I'm
the
coming to your
podcast.
house.
And have
I'm slapping that out of your hands. Like, I don't
Maybe I just
begrudge,
have a question.
I don't begrudge people their cozy fantasy or their like comfy stories, because like God knows you need something like that in this day and age. I like, through the pandemic, I read what my wife called historical yaoi, which was just like shitty like romance novels from like the Regency era, and they were extremely anodyne and like and then everyone in the bus clapped, and I just like read a ton of them because I like, my brain was fried and I needed to feel something good. But like, when I'm doing like, usually when I'm feeling bad, I want to feel worse.
Sure.
Which is why I also played Pathologic during the pandemic.
You and
Naturally.
many others.
Yeah.
I also
Well,
feel
it's-
like there's an element of wanting this to exist. Like, I think the difficulty is not that there is cozy, cool stuff. I love a lot of BL shows that are just fun romances.
Yeah.
Love it. It's the sort of hostility towards anything more difficult existing. And I think
Mhm.
that ties into us choosing this book also
Yep,
for our
sure.
episode. And I think the Munoz quote that I opened with, also, he's thinking about critical hope. He always frames it that way as a theorist. To be like, no, we're not just hopeful. It's like, what is a really clear-eyed engagement with the present world that lets us think about a possible hopeful future? But we have to work for it, and it's not going to be easy and nice, but it is about relationship building and community, even with people you kind of think are shitty sometimes.
Definitely.
And I think that ties into to this. When we were like, what could we talk about? I think it took you like 3 seconds to say, obviously, the Doctrine of Labyrinths books.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, you're right. It's this.
Yeah. I was going to say friend of the pod. Literally last week's episode, when this comes out, Jen Big Nasty of How the Red Was Won, literally just posted on Instagram. What rights we have were won by people you might not want to associate with, using tactics that you might not want to think about. And you know what I mean? Then that made me think of that. So like, it's dirty, and it's and getting to good things are like that. So yeah, I highly recommend this collection. I've not read the whole thing yet, but I've started it, and it's brilliant so far. We're gonna link it in the bio, and or the bio in the show notes. And if you've listened to this podcast and you've listened now to Aysha come on 5 times, no paywall. Come on now. Let's do our due diligence, folks.
USA Today bestseller.
Let's go.
Somehow that happened. It's wild. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
In today's USA.
There are dozens of us. Many dozens. Hundreds of dozens.
Hundreds of dozens. Well, we can get into our topic, I believe, now. We are talking about a book, Mélusine. This is in the Doctrine of Labyrinth series. And I had never touched this one before. I had no familiarity at all. Before we get into it and get into the author, Aysha, you recommended this book. What made you think of it? What's your history with it? And Lee, I'd love to hear your history with it as well. And Lenore, if you've got any, you too.
Well, I thought of it immediately for a couple of reasons. One, because this is a book about what... this is a book that Lee recommended to me. So I read it because of Lee. And then we talked about it extensively about this book. Because Lee is one of the people that I go to like talk like close read books in his DMs. Also, I think this book is about something that I am very passionate about, which is an imperfect victim. And that is, I think, an extremely important demo for kind of what is always happening online, especially after some like the Amber Heard trial, for instance, is a thing that I keep thinking about. Like this idea that victimhood and survivors of abuse look a certain way, act a certain way, and if they do not act or look that way, you cannot trust them, and they are not abuse victims. And I think that this is something that I am always thinking about. And I think that in the sort of current SF landscape where like representation is, and I just did scare quotes there, is like very important. I think that we've kind of created this situation where we want our representation to, represent well, or like this idea is like we can't let the straights see us slipping.
Sure.
I hate that. I want to be slipping.
It's a very like anodyne kind of assimilationist like bent to this whole, which only leads to like the pigeonholing of the very like people who want to like be considered normal. And of course, the default, the cis white straight, like has the right to be abnormal, to be complex and messy, and whatever anti you want to put on there, anti-hero, whatever. Why not us?
Well, I'll get into that, but I'll say also, so Lee, what is your history with the book? You recommended it to Aysha. When did you read it? What's your history with it?
Yeah, so I first read these, I think about when the second book came out was when I started. So I have my OG, like 2005 paperback with the very gay romance novel cover, which delights me. That is, the OG covers are pretty great for that, yes.
I like that better. The new cover's neat, the 2023 reprint, but it does not compare.
No.
The new cover is extremely like American romance novel where they try to downplay how gay it is.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got some fun colors going on, but it's just not the same.
Yeah. So I think I was near end of high school, probably around then, like 2006-ish, and looking for whatever gay fantasy novels are available. to me.
Sure.
And this was one of the ones that people were like, oh no, this is pretty fucking good. Like the world building's good. Also, it's queer in a really complex and messy way. The sexual politics also are something that I'm very invested in, especially by the time we get to the end of the series, thinking about what does it mean to be an imperfect, very real victim? How do we engage compassionately with like difficult people? And that they also deserve compassion and the ability to heal over time and to build relationships. Also, it's really, really about disability, which is something that I had noticed back then. Increasingly, as I have become more physically disabled in my adulthood, it hits a lot harder now in my like mid to late 30s, reading it again for like the fifth time, I think, how much from book one we're looking at disability and class as like ways that people engage with you or don't engage with you and trying to escape things like disability in your class position, and then how wealthy privileged people will treat you the second they get to. And there's a lot of this complexity in there that I think really drew me in at first. Also, it's like unrepentantly horny, which is something I really value, especially in like fag media, speaking about representation discourse. In SF currently, if one, casts an eye around, you will notice there are less of a certain kind of book than there are other kinds of books. And I think there's a lot of discomfort, particularly with queer men in SF at the moment, especially any level of like sexual explicitness or exploration of things like Felix is a sadist. We'll get into that. And over the series, that causes him a lot of emotional distress, but it's still part of his interests, his preferences. So how does he deal with that? I think all those things really came together for me, particularly as a teenager and then into my younger 20s by the time the series ended. And the frustration of how poorly Ace treated these books when they came out in ways that I will say are homophobic. That is just my opinion, but still, like they let the first book go out of print before the last one came out. They did not really support them. It was 2005. It's a different time. Like I do think if these had come out a few years later, even, it would have hit differently, because I think when Sarah Monette / Katherine Addison came back with Goblin Emperor, which is exploring some similar topics, but with less teeth, I would say, it hit really big. And that's something that I constantly think about when we're talking about the books now from a position of like the future 20 years on.
Yeah, Goblin Emperor is not even explicitly queer until like later in the series. And I don't think Maya is queer at all. Is he the main character?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I only read the first book. And like I really loved the world building in that book because it has a lot of similarities to the world building in Mélusine, like the made up words, the sort of like very dense world building that doesn't ever explain to you what's going on, really. But yeah, it felt like it felt fairly toothless to me, and in totality, I was not super into it. But I know a lot of people love that book, and I understand why. It's a good book objectively.
Yeah, sure. This has been my Deep Cut series recommendation for years, though. So I'm glad that they finally are re-released again and have audiobooks. The last one just came out like a month ago. So I can be like, no, you can go read it now. Sorry I didn't send you on a quest for like finding used paperbacks on Abe Books or something.
I mean, I've already recommended it to a couple people, so starts the cycling. And we're recommending it to a lot more people right now if you're into that type of thing. I will say right now, and maybe Ryan, you can edit this a little earlier, but that like if you haven't caught on, there is some like pretty intense themes in this. There is sexual assault, drug abuse, physical abuse, all kinds of abuse, and for the reasons that we talked about, that's an important themes to get into in literature. But of course, everyone has their sort of different thresholds and things they can deal with. Or like, maybe you're just like out and about and don't want to listen to that on a podcast right now. So totally fair if you want to turn this one off for the moment and, come back to it later or not. Up to you. But Lenore, do you have any history with this book? And what can you tell us about this author or this author of two names? Because it's interesting. Her website has both names on it. Not what you do with the pen name, but
Yeah, and it's for largely like marketing and publishing reasons that she has that pen name in the first place. As should be apparent at this point in the show. Of course, we've done 100 books now, and I don't read.
You read
Like,
now.
but
Wow,
yeah,
this was the wrong podcast to start, girl.
but yeah, no,
You
like
do read, it's just like stuff that like for some reason we never end up covering on the podcast.
Well, yeah, like, and you know, by that same token, right? I had not, I was not familiar with Sarah Monette / Katherine Addison before y'all introduced me to her work. But now I am. I do want to finish this out at some point, especially because of the strength of the characters' voices, but also like just the note this ends on. This is very much a chapter one.
Mhm.
But Monette herself now, Sarah Monette, born 25th November 1974 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Y'all know the deal with Oak Ridge, Tennessee?
I'm not familiar.
It's one of the towns that was made for the Manhattan Project. It used to be a
Oh.
fenced-off secret
Really?
town.
Huh.
And now it's like a tourist attraction and people go hiking there. It's like 30,000 people. It's not much to it, but it's just kind of interesting. She was born in like a Manhattan Project town. That's like a cool story as a writer.
I didn't know she was from Tennessee, but it super doesn't surprise me for she's from Appalachia.
No, there's some stuff in here that's like, it makes sense that I liked this a lot.
Yeah, a fellow born in Tennessee person. We got me as well, born north of Nashville here.
Well, there's our episode title, isn't it? The Monette Project. But no, she figured herself out quite quickly. She cites now the Oz series by L. Frank Baum, right? Wizard of Oz, Marvelous Land of Oz, all that, as her inspiration for getting into fantasy. And she started writing in that genre from the age of 11. She went on to get her master's and her doctorate in English literature. So a woman after my own heart, her doctoral dissertation was about the ghost in English Renaissance revenge tragedy. 100% my jam. We'll talk about the Spanish tragedy at some point on the show. I fucking love that one. As will be no surprise from reading this book, of course, she also studied classics and French. It's dripping in that. She picked up her doctorate now in 2004. The year before, she'd won a Galactic Spectrum Award for her short story, 3 Letters from the Queen of Elfland. The year after, 2005, she published today's book, her debut novel, Mélusine. Now, this gets nominated for a couple awards, shortlisted for a few more, but the series does not sell well. Ace Fantasy, which publishes them, doesn't keep her on. Lee, you were mentioning that it really didn't give her a fair shake. Didn't even, from what I was looking at, advertise the final book in the series as the final book in the series. They just threw it out there kind of as a standalone.
Yeah, and it is unreadable. It is the part 4 of 4 very distinctly. You simply could not pick up Carambus on its own.
Yeah.
I was reading a couple of reviews to that effect, yeah, and it's well, it's a victim of its marketing. That's what you're gonna get. Yeah, very deeply unfortunate for her. But her first win now for novel-length fiction comes in 2015. We've mentioned it, of course, The Goblin Emperor. That picks up a Locus, and that one is her first under her pen name of Katherine Addison. Tor Books by that time had picked her up, and they tell her, look, we'll publish you, but do it under a pseudonym. We don't want bookstores looking for your name and being like, wow, this person doesn't sell. We're not going to pick up her stuff. And
probably some homophobia with that too. Oh, look,
Sure.
the gay books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
These
because
books
there
are gay.
there are authors who had middling performing books that then were able to get published again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Just their middling performing books didn't have anal in them.
Right.
Yeah, and my recollection from the time was that Ace tried very hard to never talk about the fact that these are extremely gay books.
Wow.
Yeah.
In a world where Leo Frankowski gets a 4-book advance,
I'm sorry. I'm just just a quick thing, and Ryan might decide this is irrelevant, but my photo editor that I use to make our podcast art has different stickers, and I still, for some reason, it's pinned and I can't unpin it. The sticker from the cover of the fucking Cross Time Engineer running away from the night. And it's just I have to think about Frankowski every single episode we make. So I'm yes, the libertarian the libertarian fantasy of going back in time to the 14th century and everyone thinking you're hot will always haunt.
The thing is that really frustrates me about that is that there is nothing in these books that is not in, for instance, A Song of Ice and Fire.
100%.
Probably with less empathy often.
Yes.
It's just he doesn't find out about gay people until Elden Ring. Really.
That's true.
Like
that's true.
Well, and especially what's depicted in this book is, there's wall-to-wall trauma, there's wall-to-wall abuse of all stripes, but there's nothing of the prurient about it, Like it's very matter of fact. This is what it does to somebody, and that's the other half
this is the same year as Feast for Crows as well. It's
wow.
2005 is 2005's a big. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in 2005, actually, in fantasy. I wanted to double check, so I took Feast for Crows, Half-Blood Prince. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Twilight, Lightning Thief. We've covered a couple books on this podcast that came out in 2005. Old Man's War, Spen. Those both came out this year. And Matthew, our favorite, Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith novel.
Hell yeah.
2005.
It was a good time to be 12.
Feast for Crows. Well, maybe don't read this one when Feast for Crows or this one when you're 12. Or do, whatever.
Or do. I probably would have if I had been I didn't really hear about A Song of Ice and Fire until of Game of Thrones. I don't know why it never really came across my radar. It's kind of weird because I was like a Lord of the Rings head. But I was reading Clan of the Cave Bear when I was 13, and that book is full of fucking and stuff like that. So I probably, if I had known about these books, I would have been so excited.
You got to keep in mind that when I was 12, I still wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter.
That's true.
We come from different traditions.
I mean, I was raised Catholic, but for some reason my mom never paid attention to what I was reading. She kind of seemed to think that books are fine. Just don't watch R-rated movies.
And she was so right for that.
Yeah.
No, books are fine, especially this one. And we'll get into the why of it. But Katherine Addison / Sarah Monette, she's written 13 of the things. She's written dozens of short stories. Most recently, this past March, The Tomb of Dragons has just dropped under the Addison name. And she's very widely read, and you can tell because I was going back through some of her interviews, some of her old blog posts, and one that caught my eye, Jacob, I was just telling you about. She discusses 11 tropes she would never put in a fantasy novel unless she were going to subvert them, and some came to mind. No orbs. The wizards do not contemplate orbs.
There are orbs.
Are there orbs? Are there orbs in the Doctrine of Labyrinths? I don't think there are any orbs. The virtue is
absolutely an orb.
She does, yes, she does, Jacob. She does confirm that the virtue is an orb, but it's not explicitly described as such. And
for some reason, my brain kept reading it the virtue because it doesn't have the E on the end.
I was imagining the virtue is a giant diamond, not orby.
Yeah,
I was imagining it as broken all over the fucking floor.
Yeah. She destroys that orb. She's like, fuck this orb specifically.
Before we know what it is, it's it's gone.
Yeah, spoilers for a 20-year-old book.
That orb.
No orbs, no quests. I mean, they do go on a journey or whatever, but that's not the point. She doesn't do heteronormativity. She doesn't do whiteness as defaults. No unquestioned assumption of the values of the American middle class reader. There is still oppositional sexism in the society depicted, to be sure. There's a line I was telling you about, Aysha, that I really liked about a trouser farce, right? That people appear in. So there's sumptuary restrictions that men dress like this, women dress like this, but the bigotries of our world aren't necessarily on display. Queerness is front and center. It's just kind of normal.
There is some homophobia. There's definitely people who don't as Mildmay calls them, malls.
Malls. Yeah, there's Molly and Janice for gay and straight.
And then we'll get to the Bastion later.
Oh,
so you get other places where it sure is different.
Let's go. She also, this was funny to me, she also is not interested in writing antagonists that are pure evil anymore, because...
I was about to say,
Malphar is pretty evil.
Yeah, and she says straight up that Malkar is pure evil, and like her defense for that is I was 19 when I invented him. I've grown up since then. But yeah, she's really interested, as we'll see, in exploring like power dynamics within her work, particularly those of gender, and as well, of course. And again, this is why it's important to step out of like your comfort zone in terms of fiction. What she explores, the trauma that she explores, is is front and center, but part and parcel of that is the recovery, what that does to you, and how you piece yourself back together, which makes it harrowing, certainly, but also a very cathartic read. One last thing that also stood out as I was reading some of her interviews, she abbreviates science fiction and fantasy as SFF before it's common to do so. I don't know if she. I don't want to say that she coined it, but that was interesting to me. I'm not sure when that began to be the case.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've never even questioned that wasn't a thing that people were always doing, but now I'm going to have to go look.
I guess I don't say SFF because it comes to SFF. I always beef it, so I tend to say spec. I think because that like covers like horror and stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm annoying, so I do SF for speculative fiction because genres frustrate me. That's a little box.
No, for sure. There is also one thing that stood out to me in a Locust interview. She points out that like one of the really popular like high fantasy plots, right, is the common like scullery boy who becomes a king, right, and that's your Sword in the Stone. She says that's your Belgariad and whatnot. David and Lee Eddings. And what interests her is what happens like after that whole thing, after somebody's risen from obscurity to a position of power. And that's where our protagonist Felix is, right? It's mentioned that he came from a very poor and downtrodden position, but it's not really looked at except through not even flashbacks, just memory, just the impact, the imprint of those origins on what he's processing now.
Yeah, I would say this is like the other half of like, George R. R. Martin saying like, what would Aragorn's tax policy be, right? This other side of it is what is the emotional effects of rags to riches, right? What is what the fuck is going on in your head? And also riches aren't necessarily, you've escaped from all these dynamics or whatever. This book is very aware of class, but it's also very aware of what class doesn't get you out of. And how that being like, just having a certain amount of money doesn't necessarily make you one of these people.
I also think there's something here about the fact that this is written by someone who just finished getting a fucking doctorate, who's from Tennessee, because as someone who also just went back to academia and got a doctorate, it will drive you off the deep end to be someone who is not of this social class, constantly surrounded by people who both are and assume everyone is and have a real deep-seated like loathing and fear of real poor people and having to face the idea of an underclass. They'll talk about it, they'll theorize about it, but to be faced with it is like repulsive to them largely. And I do think that it makes sense to think about Felix being kind of violently trained into presenting as upper class. That sort of reflects on academia, I think, in a particular way, given that the Wizards of the Mirador are kind of academics. Like, that is what they are.
She actually has on her website, one of her featured short stories for free is a short story about an academic who just doesn't realize his own daughter has been dead for like a year and been replaced by like a husk of a human being.
Wow.
And
there's
that's
also
one of the
a cool book about this. It's called Summer Sons.
Read it, folks.
That out there.
Well, Aysha or Lee, one of you or both of you, do you want to frame up what this world is and what's going on here? Just sort of the broad strokes of this thing. Give it a shot.
Why don't you go ahead, Lee?
Okay. Yeah, since I think this is my fifth time, probably.
I've only read it twice.
Yes, your fifth time reading it. Aisha's fifth time on the pod. We have our expertise.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Synergy.
From 2005.
Yeah.
2005.
So, okay, we've got two protagonists, and we do have like a close, like third perspective between Mildmay and Felix. We flip back and forth between them. So Mildmay is where we start the book. He is a cat burglar, a thief who lives kind of in the Undercity, is relatively famous as what he is when the book starts. He tells us a little story about hocuses, wizards, and how you do not ever want to fuck with them because they can put blood curses on you and control you, and tells a little story about a famous evil wizard. And then we get Felix, who is our second protagonist, who is a wizard of the Mirador, which is like, as we've kind of discussed already, the big scholarly wizard enclave. They're called Cabaline wizards because they're part of a magic cabal. They all have to swear certain oaths. They think a lot of things are heresy and periodically burn witches for heresy. It feels very like Catholic churchy in some ways to me. Like healing is bad. Any magic you do to touch a person with it is bad. You got to work through like rings or objects. So all that's our background setup. And we start kind of with Felix getting in trouble because he has an old mentor. I think they said about 6 years out from their supposed breakup, Malcar Ganadian, who is also a wizard, just famously shitty. As we've discussed, he is sort of just evil, which if you're a fan of late 90s, early 2000s anime baddie protagonists and evil monsters in yaoi fiction, you'll recognize a Malcar. Like there's a real energy there if that was your type of guy.
Lenore ruined all our lives by being like, I'm imagining this guy is voiced by Regis Blackard from Adventures in Odyssey.
Yeah, no,
it kind of sucks.
And it's like, no, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, those tentacles are everywhere.
Yeah. One of the guys at court who Felix hates outs him like to his boyfriend, who is like the younger brother of the leader of the
right. He's dating like the prince.
Yeah, basically. So he's really risen in society and is like, you used to be a whore, like in Farrowlight. And Felix decides he's just gonna go with it because now he's been outed. He can't fight it. And a key part of his character is that he's a huge bitch, and that's why I like him. He's just a mean person, and I think he deserves to be a mean person. And you see even in this first moment of what his character will be like, that he decides to lash out of this like shame and humiliation and fear. His life starts falling apart. He goes back to Malcar. He is raped by Malcar as part of a spell to destroy the Virtue, that big orb that keeps everybody in line in the Mirador, and as we later learn, kind of keeps all the old necromancy the city used to run on at bay. Whoopsie daisy. And that's where his story starts. And Mildmay's story starts that he gets hired to steal some rubies back for this hot woman who's kind of trying to rise into the middle class by dating rich men, a whole type. She's fun, flirty. She doesn't seem to realize how dangerous any of the stuff she's getting involved with is. They end up doing
I'm sure it'll end up fine for her.
Oh, yeah totally fine. Ugh. Like witch who wants those cursed blood rubies that she stole. And that is how they both get into their end of the trouble. And these two totally divergent plot lines will eventually come together when Felix and Mildmay meet. This is a slight spoiler, but also what I tell everyone to sell the book. They're half-brothers. So you get a really direct comparison of like what different upbringings can look like and what different forms of like disability can do in that way. And also Felix is really hot for his half-brother. That is relevant. And Mildmay is straight.
Mildmay's kind of like, oh, okay, about it. Like he's pretty chill about it.
As the series goes on, how he handles the like, I'm sorry I'm not gay. I think our lives would be easier if I was. Maybe we could just work this out. Like, it's not like we were raised together. Unfortunately, I am straight. So what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
And that is a through line they dig into.
Yeah, these two characters both have incredibly distinctive, incredibly strong voices. I have to say, just, to show my cards at the top, Mildmay is far and away my favorite chapters.
Mildmay is way more likable than Felix. And Felix spends most of this book totally insane. Like, because
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Like, the ritual that, like, when Lee mentions that Malcar rapes him, he does it as part of a ritual to break the Virtue, and what he does to him, what he's doing is, while he's raping his body, he's like raping his magic. He's taking his magic, because Felix is much more powerful than Malkar, and he uses his magic to destroy the virtue. But whatever he did to him, like, broke something in his brain that then makes him, I think it's called like a morbid sensitivity to magic. So whenever anyone does magic around him, the world like collapses in on itself, and he starts seeing everyone around him as like animals and beasts.
I thought this was really effective, this section where his magic is destroyed. I'll read a quick section from this here. I felt him in my mind even more vividly than I felt him in my body. A hurtful, hateful, rending presence, like the color of blood, like the taste of iron, like the scent of burning, destroying everything in his path until he reached the core of my power and seized it. There were no words for the agony that stabbed through me from head to heart to hands, enveloping my entire body in the molten blackness of cramp and spasm. No words, no strength, nothing. I can't breathe. I can't see. My heart is beating itself to death against the sides of an iron box. And it goes on for longer. And this is one thing this book does remarkably well, is the description of pain and agony and the specificity of it, right? It can describe different types of it and its different emotional states and different ways of dealing with it, or just not dealing with it. I will say from the top, and it's something Lenore and I discussed, and it's a thing that, like, I think I enjoy the book more looking back because of this. God, I wish we'd had a chapter of Felix being kind of where he was before his collapse. Not like, I usually am like, let's get into the plot, but I really don't think it is until like halfway through this book I kind of realize how far Felix has fallen, or kind of what he was. Like, I'm like, because like, it's like literally what, like page 2 where they're like, you're a whore, like, gets called out. And I'm like, is that weird? How bad is that? What is this? Right. Maybe I'll disagree. I'm not sure, but that is a thing that, like, for me, the whole book, like, I think if I reread this book, I'd enjoy it a lot more, knowing the context of what Felix was, who he was, seeing later in this book when he recovers to some extent, the level of charisma and energy and power he's able to have. So I guess for anyone like kind of going into this, it's worth keeping in mind, like, this guy, despite being broken, is like, in a lot of ways, he's like very sharp and very powerful and very, you know, for all intents and purposes, very cool to everybody outside of him. And that is something I struggle with the whole book, like, not the whole book, but until like about halfway through, realizing like what this descent actually was and how significant it was. I don't know. That is something that frustrated me. I think that's one thing that frustrates me in this book, for all I like about it, is there's multiple times like that where it's like, we're very upset for a long time about the virtue being broken without me really knowing what it is. And I think that is a decision that's intentional, but I do have some struggles with that. I don't know. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting about the secondary horror, or a primary one, frankly, in the middle section of the text, is like institutional power and abuse.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I like feel both is very cathartic for me and also is very upsetting, is that like no one listens to him. He's right, but because they have been given the tools and the ability to dismiss him as crazy, they can do whatever they want to him in an institutional way that is perceived as helping. Like, he gets sent to a madhouse. I think there is a lot of commentary on institutionalization and like the power that once you get in the grasp of an institution can be exerted over you, entirely separate of your will, body, everything. And there is no one to believe or help you. And I do think that going to that like depth is part of what builds us back up as the story goes on, is like, okay, what does Felix do with this knowledge of institutional power? And then what does he not do? Because he is a very imperfect protagonist in like how he will treat Mildmay later, and not thinking about his own experiences as soon as he gets out of it, and like how that can affect someone else, particularly like medical and psychiatric abuse. And I do think that's really interesting and compelling to me as a story, that it works through those things, particularly in fantasy, because I think fantasy books have a real habit of not acknowledging institutional power as institutional power, even though they're so often about it. So yeah, I don't know. That's one of my...
I also like I get what you're saying, Jacob, and I definitely felt a little bit at sea in the beginning of these books when I started reading them. And like Lenore said, this is very much like a book one. Like you will get more Felix than you can stomach. He is like he's so sharp. He's so like acerbic and like very very annoying. um but the so like what one thing that I think was intentional is that you are sort of thrown in to watch this man suffer, and I think that it is intentional that you have never seen him on top of his game, because I think it makes it even hard, like it is challenging the reader to care about someone who you do have not seen be quote unquote valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, so the first thing you're told about him is that he was a child whore,
Mm-hmm.
which makes you empathize with him, but it also sort of puts you in this like, okay, so this person is powerless. This person does not hold any like intrinsic value in this society. And you're sort of asked to like sort of sit in this like fear and self-hatred with him for himself, because as the series goes on, and also even to a certain extent in this book, Felix is very slut-shamey. He is very like he thinks very badly of prostitutes, like and that's almost like what the fourth book is like about, is about like him making friends with a sex worker. But he very much like hates himself so much that like radiates out from him to everybody around him. And I think that if you that would not work as well if we saw him initially as in control and a commanding presence. I think that we need to build to that.
Yeah.
Because we see that at the very end.
Yeah,
We
you
see-
bore
we
me,
see him sort of
darling.
like, yeah, we see him like absolutely like everyone is terrified of him at the end because he's so like, bring me my brother now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the to be that commanding presence, to move in that elite circle in which we see him from the jump, requires. I mean, he's not there because he's come into his own. He's not there because he's asserted, his own agency or anything. Like the whole process of him going from, downtrodden boy whore to like noble. Is courtesan an accurate term? I guess maybe. Like he's
got a job there too. It's not just that he's there for Shannon.
that's true. That's true.
Right, yeah, he is a Cabaline wizard.
Right.
That
And
didn't hurt.
broke up, which is one of the best lines about him and Malcolm's relationship, is when he's like, I thought I left, and it turns out I was just on a very long leash.
Yeah,
Exactly. Because the whole process of becoming a Cabaline wizard involves Malkar beating the lower class out of him. Literally, like, and this is what I love about, we mentioned the descriptions of trauma and whatnot. They're threaded through the most mundane things. Like it's mentioned that the words for like units of time vary if you're like lower class versus if you're like upper class, right? Indiction versus year, right? And just hearing the word indiction can drag Felix back to when he was, when he was on the bottom of this whole structure. But again, he only rises in that structure because of his enslavement, essentially, by Malkar. That, incidentally, is what the opening of the book is about. That's the sort of dynamic which Mildmay describes. If you're a hocus, which is what the sort of colloquial term for a wizard is, right? You can basically enslave somebody to your will, and thereafter they have your protection from whatever other like curses somebody might level at them. But in exchange, they completely surrender their agency.
Yeah, and this factors heavily in the next few books. But the obligation to I think it's called, because everything is French. I'm not going to say it French. I cannot be French. But Yeah, I think is very telling. I think that the word that Felix uses for what he was to Malkar is catamite, which is the a male word for concubine.
Mm.
But also Malkar is very against anyone knowing that they were lovers, and not for, I don't think for homophobia reasons. I think for completely for class reasons.
Sure.
Because he is was his apprentice, like according to everybody else. Malkar was his teacher, but he was actually like his lover. And I think he describes it as like towards the end he says like, and then this so and so ever since Malkar half seduced, half raped me when I was 14.
Yeah.
Like he bought him. That is
Yeah, he
part
bought
of
him. Yeah.
Yes. And the fact that even, he as an adult looking back on it remembers it as a 14-year-old that can't even be seduced, right? Like
Right.
in a way that's appropriate at all. That it even is half rape, shows how, not advanced, how he's still dealing with this shit. Yeah. I think a lot of the suffering in the book, I was worried for the first third or so that it was not going to pay off, that this was just kind of going to be a whipping boy for the entire book, and that there wasn't anything after this. And I was hoping desperately that there was, like, that we were getting somewhere with it. I've been hurt before by my book, you know what I mean? And it does, and that's so. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we won't go plot for plot, beat for beat. This is a long book, so, read it yourself for sure.
Read the whole series.
Yes.
I'm going to have
It's excellent.
I'm going to have to. It is, we're definitely on, this trajectory here, these two characters towards intersecting. And, on the other side of things, we have Mildmay with his very strong voice, running around the city, just kind of trying to scrape by, trying to, impress his girlfriend.
Like gentleman thief is basically what you could call Mildmay. He is a very kind, empathetic person who steals for a living and also is like very smart but uneducated.
Yes. And he steals and he will kill people, and he does not have much of a code. Like,
right, he's an assassin.
Right. His code is, it's like his interpersonal interactions are almost separate from his work. Not always. He has moments where he's like, shit, I don't want to steal from a poor farmer. I'm gonna, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
But like, he is able to, at least he's able to try to separate his work from his actions, which I think is, interesting. And there's a reason that, like, scoundrel with a heart of gold is a trope. It's fun. It's cool.
You also kind of gradually find out that he was also in a relationship where he was being controlled by a more powerful person. He was also sexually assaulted because this woman was sleeping with him when he was like, 15? And she was like in her 30s, maybe?
They've already been sleeping together for a long time before that.
Like,
also, like, there is a direct mirror of like the thief keepers as adults who gather up these orphaned fucking children and use them as kept thieves. And I think it was really interesting and important to mirror like a straight man who in the context of this book has been sexually abused by a woman. And like, that happens, and we sure don't see it all that often in text, and that he almost doesn't have the language to frame that either. And I think they both have a really different approach to their sexuality that is deeply shaped, like on purpose, by these early experiences and how normal they believe them to be in the context of the world. And I think that's why I find it a really valuable like exploration of sexual trauma in a way that I think the stuff that is supposed to be good representation, I often find really alienating and offensive, like as someone who has a history of sexual trauma.
Sure.
It's like, no, it's pretty fucking complicated for people to get to, especially if you were young. And I do think that that's something that it mirrors really well, but I think people talk about Mildmay's less, even though it shapes his relationships with women through the entire series. And like how he perceives himself to be sexually useful is also part of his like deal as a service top kind of guy, which you pair with Felix's sadism and are like, okay, how are these things shaped by your experiences without the text judging that? Like, it doesn't think that's a bad thing necessarily. It's just very honest about like how we got here in that way. So,
Yeah, I went back and read through the conversations we had about this book last year, Lee. And the thing I keep bringing up as I go along is this book is so normal about everything. It is so normal about sex work. It is so normal about BDSM. It is so normal about class, so normal about disability. And I don't mean that it's like woke about it. Like, I can't think of a better word for it. Like, it is not, it's just so like, this is a fact of life. Like sexual violence is something that happens to people, and we are going to treat it not as good, but as something that is just a fact of reality for a lot of people. And like sex work and disability, like there is a character, like Felix has a sexual partner in a later books who has had his tongue cut off, and just the way that is taught, like the way that is not fetishized but also not ignored when they have sex was really striking to me, because it wasn't, because you find a lot of like I don't know, you can find like amputation porn that is very like fetishizy about it, but that's not what this is at all. It's just sort of like comments on that he can feel it or something, and it's just so normal. I couldn't think of another word besides normal for it.
I think too, it's I think it's very interesting that I for a minute there thought that both Felix and Mild May had been owned sort of by the same person, because they both use the term keeper, which I think that's actually, semi-intentional, this idea, because it's paralleling their experience. They both grew up as kept thieves, which is basically like, think like,
indentured.
Yeah, or think like Oliver, like, from like Charles Dickens, like Fagin or whatever, like, without the anti-Semitic parts. With all these kids that like steal for them and other things. And they both refer to Keeper as this person that like owned them. Turns out they were different people. And Keeper for Felix was someone who relentlessly beat him and threatened to drown him, and waterboarded him basically. And for Malmay, also very abusive situation. Again, this is a woman that sexually assaulted him repeatedly. And they deal with it in different ways. And you also see something I found interesting is when like Felix finds out Mild May had that same abuse, he doesn't feel like camaraderie with him. He's like, fuck, he's normal about it. And I'm not. I'm not like well adjusted. And then we're in Mild May's head. And it's like, no, he's dealing with his shit too. He's funnier and he's like quirkier and he's like able to like, be his like a guy that's like quippy and fun and whatever, versus like it's more overt, maybe because you just had like a magic sledgehammer taken to your skull. But like y'all are both, messed up on the inside. And I like though that like, I don't know, it just that it's able to be represented differently, but they have these parallel lives in a lot of ways, and that they are, half brothers. I think it's very, very, very effective, but it also shows how people can turn out differently. It's also not like mechanical. It's not like, oh, this happened to you, therefore it's not an equation. You can have Felix who has his own very traumatic reactions, and you can have Mild May who walks around and, when he sees a prostitute, he says, well, I ain't no prude, but I wasn't sure her neckline was legal. But then he can go and have his panic attacks too. You know what I mean? Like they're different types of guys.
Yeah. I also think it's really interesting how going back and forth, even before Mild May and Felix meet, which is about halfway through the book, like fate sort of like conspires to bring them together, like magic sort of brings them together. But even their storylines very much reinforce each other, because we learn things about like the Mirador from Mild May, because he's terrified of the Mirador, and he also has a connection to the Mirador that becomes very apparent and important. And also then like Felix commenting on the lower city where he's from and never wants to go back to and is fiercely ashamed of. But like one specific thing that really hit me on this reread was like Stephen, the Lord Protector, who is basically like the king of the Mirador of Mélusine, is the brother of Shannon, who is Felix's ex, like the prince who he breaks up with very violently. Actually, I think he actually hits him because he's so angry. Another thing that you're like, oh, Felix, stop doing this. He hates Felix, and Felix thinks it is because he's like, Stephen hates me because I'm trash, because like blah, blah, blah. And then we just hear from Mildmay very casually, oh, Stephen hates malls. Stephen is homophobic. So like that is like, oh, and you're like, oh, maybe Stephen doesn't hate Felix because he's a piece of trash. Maybe Stephen hates Felix because he's homophobic. Like, and is like very, doesn't want his brother being gay, even though he is.
Ironic considering when Felix has his vision, Stephen is a bear. Question. That raised?
You do get a different view of Stephen later when, like, I think it's book 2, I think you meet the female main character of this story, who is the third POV character, and who is a woman who has a more interesting, like, you get to see a different perspective of Stephen from her. What is it? Mahitabel? Is that her name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also even with Stephen, like the level of compassion that I think the books have for almost every single character is one of those grounding, like the normalcy of it. There's a lot of compassion to even behaviors that are bad that you can understand where they come from. And I think the pair of Mildmay and Felix is like, Mildmay turns his shame inward, usually. Mm-hmm. Like when they're out hanging out with Ginevra's friends who are all sort of slumming it, basically. Like they're slumming it in the lower city. They're educated, they're poets, they go to school, and they're all really shitty to Mildmay, who is like, I will put up with this because I like this girl, and like she just doesn't get it, what it's like to have a life where you actually grew up rough. They just like to pretend they do. And I think that is a familiar sensation for anyone who's like been in that kind of social situation where you are aware that you were kind of the coyote like in the room or the bear in the cage. Yeah. And even Stephen, there's one little line that struck me rereading where it's like that people called him like the bear that had learned to read or something like that in real life. Because because he just seems kind of big and stupid to people. Like they think he's ignorant and he's ruling over all these studied, learned wizards.
Because he's an Animar, right? He's not a wizard.
He can't do magic.
Yeah, so. Animar is like, doesn't do magic.
Yeah.
And so is Mildmay. Maybe, question mark.
Maybe.
There's also, like, there's this underlying thing that isn't so obvious in this book, but as the books go on, Mildmay has this incredible sense of direction where he can basically get himself through any maze. And the Doctrine of Labyrinths is the name of the series because, like, labyrinths and mazes are, like, extremely important in this story, both, like, metaphorically and, like, actually physically. But, like, it becomes pretty clear that Mildmay does have a kind of magic, but it's never acknowledged because it is not the right kind of ruling class magic.
Mm-hmm. Lenore, are you going to say it or am I? Mild maze? I figured you would think of it before I did. Sorry, came to head.
Well, on the subject of his name, like it's again about halfway through the book. It's fascinating where it comes from. And this actually has historical precedent. Are y'all familiar with like hortatory names?
Oh yeah, like Puritan names, like "Thou shalt not commit adultery."
Exactly. If I think the most famous like historical precedent to my mind is Nicholas, if God hadst not pardoned thee, thou wouldst be damned. Bourbon. And yeah, Mildmay in the same way. His name is Mildmay. Your sufferings be at the hands of the wicked, which. I mean that. Yes, hello, cat.
Huge fan. Sorry, a cat has appeared.
Unofficial fifth mic today. She'll interject at some point. But yeah, no. But that's where he's at. Like right from the jump. It's look. There are very powerful people who are going to abuse you, who are going to treat you as a tool, as an obstacle, as whatever they want, and you just have to hope that you don't get too fucked up by them, and that's where he's from, and that's why it persists through through to the present day, right? He's very, very conscious of the lifestyle gap that he and his partner Ginevra have, to the point where, like, I mean, it's fairly early on, but it's well realized enough that it sticks with you. He doesn't even tell her he loves her, doesn't even get the chance to do it because that's not what he's for.
Right.
Yeah,
he's
She
great,
gets,
like very
she gets murdered
fundamental.
pretty early on.
pretty early on.
Yeah.
And there's a bit that really this book really does class extraordinarily well, and there's a bit that I want to point up here. It's in chapter
4.
End of chapter 3 when he's on a date with Ginevra, like a double date, I guess, with her and like some friends of hers, and there's this jackass, Austin Lefebvre, and
I kind of fuck with Austin. I'm sorry.
he's your I can fix him character.
I can fix Austin.
Mild Mays, well, nobody can fix Austin now.
Yeah.
My dude is extremely drowned.
Not with the legal magics, at least, of the
of the Mirador, yeah.
They got some necromancy for him, but no, so like as has been mentioned, right? It's a regular thing that to sort of keep the population satisfied and like feeling that they're protected. The Mirador sends out witch hunters every so often. There's this like witch finder general, one of whom actually Mild May killed, and that's part of why he's got this like curse hanging over his head. And Austin's going on and on about how like, oh, like this last hunt like was really good, like it rooted out some like real bad hombres, and like there's one guy in particular that was like the worst of them all. And this person that he's talking about happens to be a friend of Mild May's, and that's where Mild May, like he's sort of just like sitting there and taking it usually, but that's where he finds the strength to come out and say, no, that's bullshit. And it's really disappointing that Ginevra like gets pissed at him for like, rocking the boat. But there's this bit here that really illustrates just how beautiful it must have been to know this person who is being defamed. And I'll read it here. There was this silence. This is after Mild Mays, chewed him out. I was remembering Zephyr, how he'd been tall and heavyset and had a face like a full moon, round and all scarred from smallpox, and it didn't matter what you'd come in for. He'd tell you all about his latest experiments with growing roses and the weird thing he'd found in the library of Heth Escaladon last Noviem. And oh yeah, that thing you were asking about the other month, I think I got an answer for you. He never said a mean word about nobody, and about the only thing Zephyr wouldn't help you with was hexes. He'd never done nothing wrong in his life except not playing by the Mirador's rules, and they burned him for it. And this is somebody who, the popular conception of him, at least in Austin circles, is that, oh no, he was like a blood magic dude and the world's better off, without. And if this is somebody who's lived his life in the lower city, right, Mild May, and he has no epistemic authority. Him and like people like him have no epistemic authority over what that is really like, right? And the real human cost of how the state treats that population is not apparent to like anybody outside of it. And like if you're any kind of marginalized, especially like if you're trans in the United States, right? Maybe if you're at dinner with your relatives, somebody who's read the New York Times raises what they think are valid concerns about hormones and bone density or whatever, just goes off of some bullshit. This stands out, right? And you're the bad guy in that setting for setting the record straight all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the whole thing with like the dogs, which is what he calls the police, dogs rounding up wizards, it really fucking hits different in 2025. Like reading that was like pretty intense. Like, just like these people that every so often are let loose on the city to round up, to basically hit their quota and round up wizards.
Chapter 4, the very top of it says the dogs started raiding on 19 Prairial, which I guess is a month. They were supposed to be rounding up heretics and spies, but you notice how they were starting in Queen's Dock and Simside, and you had to wonder. Erasmus Spalding had one idea about what was going on, and Mayor Elviner Packer had another. And so you even see this like enforcement, right? Like maybe the person at the top, whether or not they're a good person, has a vision of what's happening on the ground, and then the further down you go, the more there are people who are comfortable with that type
I thought
of
he was
writing.
only going to deport criminals.
Right,
Mm-hmm,
exactly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you get to the bit where he's sheltering with Margot, and when the dogs come through, they just straight up murder a bunch of her kids. And she seems to be one of the good possible keepers who is more like, this is sort of like an orphanage, and we do just steal to live. Like, these are my kids.
the Newsies, basically. Yeah.
And that, like, he knows that it's his fault, but also that it's the impunity of the state, largely, like, that no one will ever care about these children at all.
Yeah.
It's very grounded, I think, in those politics in a way that's very uncomfortable but real. Yeah.
Right. And when they do finally meet, you've kind of been like primed with these two characters, Felix and Mildmay, to the point that like when everybody sees like Felix is being chewed out for some bullshit because nobody will ever believe. Like, he's like Cassandra. He's like noticed that a tower they're near is haunted, but Kabaline wizards don't believe in ghosts, even though they're real and everywhere.
Self-evidently,
Yeah.
They're
there
real
are literal
and my friend.
ghouls in that swamp, and they're like, no, there aren't. And you're like, they're there.
Yeah. Mildmay's like, I'm being chomped on right now by a ghoul. And like, Mildmay comes in and everybody's like shocked because they look really similar to each other, even though Felix is like half a foot taller than him and not mixed the way that Mildmay is. I think the implication is that like Felix is white, like
Felix
red hair, yellow eyes, from fantasy Greece or whatever. Like everything is really Greek sounding. And they look really similar, and everybody is like immediately like very put off by Mildmay because Mildmay has a scar on his face, which makes him look like a thug and makes it so that he's very hard to understand, even though he's really good at languages. Like he picks up other languages like instantly, but people like, and this is way more obvious in later books because Felix and Felix ends up bringing Mildmay back to the Mirador with him. And people constantly act like they can't understand what Mildmay is saying because his words are very slurred because his mouth is fucked up by a scar. But you also get the impression that a lot of this is just people pretend like, because for instance, I know people very close to me, they speak perfect English, but they have an accent. And I have multiple times had white people act like they can't understand what they're saying. Even though, yes, you can. Shut up.
Yeah, and that they think he's stupid. Also,
Right.
that's part of it, is that you look like you shouldn't be able to do this. And the language is consistently, even by the end of this book, there's a real kind of mic drop moment he gets to have where he's like, oh no, I've understood you the whole time. I just can't speak it very well, but I know everything that you've said about me. And it's like a real moment of shame for the doctors at this place who consider themselves the good guys.
Yeah.
Right. So like I was saying, like Mildmay is like primed to be the only person who like cares about and believes Felix. Like he has this immediate empathy for Felix, partly because he sees that they're brothers and he's never had any family in his life. So he instantly they feel like this affinity to each other because they've never had anything like this. And so they get to the point basically where they need to like run from some threat that's coming. So Mildmay is like, I'm going with Felix. I don't care what anybody else says. So they sort of, and Felix has been having these dreams where this person he refers to as a sunling, who is like a person who looks like him, somebody who's like redheaded, white, and like is like, who are you? Come find me and I will fix whatever's been done to you. So he just knows that they need to go east. And so Mildmay and him start going east, and with Felix like being half the time completely out of his mind.
Which Mildmay calls down the well, that he's down the well in the water, and you can't call down.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I think it should be noted just for those who haven't read the book. At this point, Malkar uses Felix magic again to sabotage the magic of the Mirador, which is we don't quite understand it because we're not academic magicians, but like they don't
understand it either because it's not Kabaline magic. So they keep being like, oh, Felix must be doing this because the thing that Malkar does is not possible. And all the other, there's two other magicians, what is it, Marvortian and Gideon, who are from different schools of magic, who are like, no, we do this all the time. It is very possible. Shut up.
Gideon sees this right away. He's like, did nobody check to see if there was like a compulsion on this guy preventing him from saying shit?
Yeah.
And the Kabalines are like, well, Malkar can't do that. It's illegal.
Right. And what he did though was he basically destroyed he destroyed the magic of the Mirador. He destroyed and he then later on he sets the thing on fire and it gets even worse, right? Like they destroyed this symbol, the virtue, and then he's set the Mirador on fire. Everything's falling apart. So this like magic power that binds the city together, that allows magic to work, starts going haywire. We don't fully understand it, but we know shit is going sideways. This is a dangerous place to be. And clearly like this little nation state here is able to even be independent because they have this magical prowess. They are on the borders of a much larger country, the Empire. And they are clearly like going to be in a bad place very quickly.
Malkar has removed their nuclear deterrent.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
they
literally.
lost their nuclear deterrent. And basically, so basically like Felix having to flee, I mean, is part of this entire process where like nobody, like you said, nobody believes him. I wrote in my notes, everyone is being with like 5-0 so mean to Felix, even though it's their fault that he's like this bad off. Like, you know, he's fucked up by Malkar, but the 8 months being institutionalized or whatever didn't help.
Yeah. Another thing that we find out steadily about Felix is that he's extremely beautiful. Like when he's not extremely institutionalized and like had all his hair cut off and stuff, he is extremely beautiful. And that's like one of the things. And also like Mildmay mentioned, we mentioned this other guy, Gideon, who is like the person who comes and is kind to Felix. And Mildmay then observes Gideon is helping Felix because he's in love with him.
Yeah.
Also worth noting that Gideon is a refugee.
Yeah.
Like that is part of their having to cross over into the very edges of the Bastion, the big scary empire that he fled from. And like he makes that sacrifice for Felix, even knowing that it's really risky for him to do it. And that's where they get split up, is that the army is like coming in. So clearly we realize they've been discovered, which we don't find out what happens with that till later. But
yeah, Gideon, kind of vanishes about halfway through the book but he'll come back. But Gideon, I think, is interesting because Gideon is a good person. Like he legitimately like is like, why are you treating this man so badly? Has nobody checked for a compulsion? What is wrong with you animals? But also and there's other people like this too. Felix gets a lot of slack cut for him in ways that Mildmay never does because Felix is good looking. Lots and lots of people are just like completely enamored of Felix. And this starts happening towards the end of this book and extremely hard in the next book. Like Felix can just wrap people around his finger, which is his default way of acting.
Yeah. The bit that you read about Zephyr, this is a very mild thing, but like the way they both differently talk about people who are fat in this book. The way Felix describes like the friar monk who is straight up evil, like in the institution, versus how Mildmay talks about Zephyr. It's like a one-off thing that you'll notice, but Felix thinks about things that way because he's so fucking hot. Like he does assume like that physical beauty, and that makes sense with his past also, and like how he knows to get his way in a way that is often really self-destructive, and he hates himself for.
Right.
But he lashes out when he does it, and Mildmay tends to turn it inward. Right. So I think that's why they make such a fascinatingly, sometimes incompatible pair as the book goes on. Like even this one, as they're traveling through the grasslands and have to lay some ghosts to rest, which I want to get to all the ghosts also in a bit. Like the Mirador thinks they aren't real, but they're clearly a center point of what history is here, is ghosts and necromancy. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Throwing it all out there.
Also, we should bring up another big theme in this book. Not really so much in this book, but it's huge in the rest of the books. So, like, Felix is very attracted to his brother. And he like, and it kind of comes upon him when he is like half out of his mind and kind of doesn't recognize Mildmay. And of course,
they're still traveling to the place that presumably is going to heal Felix.
Right. And they didn't grow up together. So like, and this is like a theme that is explored in the story because Mildmay like finds out about this attraction and we hear what he thinks about it and how he sort of like, and also like as it goes on, you're like, Felix doesn't really know how to feel affection for people that is not sexual, and there's like, it's not surprising that this is true. Also, it's another thing that he can use to beat himself with, like, I am a disgusting person, I want to fuck my brother kind of thing. So, and then it kind of becomes this like way that he can kind of stop himself from getting, he like sabotages his own relationship with Mildmay with this attraction that I think he does really feel, but also I think it's a self-defense mechanism too.
Yeah, you have this bit here where, I mean, when he's traveling together, he's looking at him, and he says, and suddenly, like throwing open a pair of shutters, I saw the muscles of his back moving beneath his skin, the strength of his shoulders, the long-fingered grace of his hands. I'd always known that Mildmay, despite being a good half-foot shorter than I, was as muscular and agile as an acrobat. But now I saw that he was beautiful. And I think it's interesting. It throws that out, and then it just says, oh, he had belonging, and then it moves on from there. It's an example of it being extremely normal in the sense of like, not that the book is like, isn't incest or incestual attraction cool, but it trusts the reader to be like, oh, interesting, and like deal with that in their own way. The book is like, hey, here's what's happening, and now you got to like take this and deal with this. And I can't speak to what happens in later books. I've only read this one, but I find that to be pretty remarkable too, that it doesn't like sit here and like expect you to have to be told that that's bad or irregular. You know what incest is and you know whatever, but you also are smart enough to know, presumably, if you've been paying attention, why these attractions might come up for the reasons that you just exchanged. Why
Also,
he has those experiences.
Mildmay truly doesn't give a shit because he is on team like, we didn't grow up together, we're men. Like it literally doesn't matter.
He's like, whatever.
Like, that's also relevant when it comes
There's
up later.
literally an exchange later that goes something like, wait, you want to fuck me? And Felix is like, yes. And he's like, ain't that incest? And he's like, yes, it would be. And he goes, all right.
Yeah,
like,
no, he just doesn't care.
He doesn't want to do it because he's not attracted to men. But he is very like, people have done worse things to me than had
Our
to with me.
Codependent relationship is already a lot. There is also a bit to Felix's ability to shame himself for everything. At the end of this, when he realizes how intensely Mildmay has been disabled by this curse, in the process of rescuing him and taking him to this place so he can be healed and he'll be okay, the cost is that like Mildmay has lost like his cat burglar ability. Like he will no longer ever again be able to inhabit his body the way that he has his whole life, that has mattered to him so deeply and has structured his sense of self and worth and capacity. And like Felix will never really fully get over till they process this at the very end, like that's his fault, like in a very real way, that he has cost this beauty, like this capacity, like that's what he did to Mildmay. And I think that's also really important in like how they both think about Mildmay's acquired disability, basically, because his leg gets really fucked up. And then the doctors don't listen to him when he tells them that it hurts because they think he's, you know, a thug and a murderer.
Which is also extremely, like, if you are any kind of marginalized person, if you're a person of color, if you are a trans person, if you are a woman, you are used to doctors not listening to you or caring about your pain.
Yeah. So another huge thing in this book that we've barely touched on, but is super important, is ghosts.
Well, you can't touch them, they're ghosts.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can't.
Guys, they don't exist. The Kabbaline teachings tell me ghosts don't exist, so they're not real.
Yeah, it feels very, I was just recalling the other day that I was, when I was in high school, like my last year in my Christian high school, when I was like picking up, finally pushing back on some stuff a little bit within the norms. I remember just asking, hey, what about intersex people at one point? And just being told by Bible teachers, they don't exist. And I pull it up on social media, or not social media, on Google. I'm like, well, no, they exist, whatever. I'm like, you know, and they were just like, no, they don't. Liberal propaganda. So I know that's different because this is ghosts, but
everyone's clitoris looks exactly the same.
No, I promise you, this guy has
never seen the clitoris. Yeah, many such cases.
He had a whole lot of kids that didn't look like him. I don't know. Anyway, but that to say, on that very silly counterexample, the Kabbaline denies ghosts, but they're very real and they're in this book.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's actually a pretty good tie-in because there's a moment when Felix is like better. He's back to himself and he's reading books in this garden in this other country that are all about this shit. And it's like, oh, he has a moment of like shame almost about growing up in a school of magic and being taught in this very rigid, like rule-based, oath-based system that none of this existed. And then he's reading all these books and they're like,
It's like finding gay
no.
books and being
Yeah,
like,
no,
oh,
100%. He is getting out of what is basically religious indoctrination to be like, oh shit, there's all these other ways of explaining things and doing magic. And part of that is ghosts, ghouls, the phantom they encounter in the wizard's tower, that there is this entire kind of extra natural world that only the Cabellines don't believe in. It is only them. And there's a note that they like burned all their books on necromancy and shit. There's a one-liner when they're talking about after Malcar uses him to set fire to the Mirador and break a bunch of the spells, that a bunch of people fucking die because the spells had been keeping like these necromantic ghoulies in the crypts this whole time for a couple hundred years.
Yeah, they're just
And now
down
there's
there.
no protection. They were just fucking down there.
There are
Like,
whole sections of the
also-
Mirador no one goes to. And they're like, yeah, there's stuff down there.
Don't worry
it's
about
like
it.
Hogwarts, kind of.
Mhm.
Like, nobody knows.
That Felix, when he's mad and wandering the Mirador, finds a ghost boy that is like a dead prince from several hundred years ago who was raised by a necromancer and they never put him back. And he's like, this is a hell. This is a hell. Please release me if you ever get back. So put a pin in that one. There's that ghost. We also encounter the Phantom, which is like a demon, basically, that has been summoned by a wizard in this old wizard's tower who wanted to fuck his student and she turned him down. So he summons this demon, kills her as part of it, gets possessed, and then is like, oh shit, throws himself out a window because he doesn't want to be possessed. And that thing is still in there. And Felix is desperately trying to warn everyone that something's wrong, even though he doesn't have the language to describe it. But the second he tells Gideon is like, starts cussing in his native language. And it's like, yeah, we have those. Those are really fucking bad. But no one else will listen. And then you also have, as he and Mildmay are traveling east, like through the grasslands, he starts talking about the crying people, is what he calls them, and realizes it is this like ancient sacked city, basically, that worshipped a goddess of death, more or less, that you could only get to her by walking through a maze. And that was their funeral rite, and no one ever did it for them. Because
Sacked by people who look like Felix,
Yeah.
specifically.
Mhm.
By the good
Vikings,
people that will help him.
Uh-huh.
Like these people who are like the mythical white people from another place who from up till now have been these like kind like thing that he's trying to get to where he can be normal and stuff. And Mildmay also kind of looks like this, but I think that he's mixed.
Yeah.
But they are literally these invaders they were these colonizers who used to rule this whole continent.
Yeah, they just completely destroy this whole city. He has like a nightmare possessed by a ghost of one of the people killed during it, and they eventually, Mildmay helps him create like a grass maze. He can't see any of this. He can sense something is weird, but he can't see any of it the way that
Mildmay's like an empath.
Yeah,
I love Mildmay for helping with this. God, I love him so much for being like, I don't see this, but he was right before, and I'm going to trust him in a way that no one else has been willing to their detriment, and that Mildmay is willing to say, because he's not, educated past being smart, the way these people are, he's willing to say, I don't know things, and this guy that's even acting abnormally, that is not well, still has knowledge, and I am going to listen to him when he's making sense. And I fucking love that.
There's a bit.
Mildmay is ride or die for Felix very fast.
Yes. He's really like it's as you say, he doesn't have the education for it, he doesn't have the terminology for it, but nevertheless, he's really, really good at recognizing when somebody's having a trauma response and modulating accordingly. There's this bit on page 291 here. I saw it give way in his face. The sharpness wasn't just gone, it was crushed flat. He'd been baiting me, sure, he being Felix, but I saw why all at once, saw how he'd been fencing off this, I don't know the word I want, Zephyr would have had one, I guess, but all I can say is that I saw how bad he was hurt, and how it was worse than just being hurt. It was more like somebody being tortured with the red-hot pokers and the rack and everything, only it was all inside, and there wasn't no torture that you could kill or reason with, or nothing. It was just there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mildmay, like, being like, oh, he like is like, oh, PTSD, but he doesn't know what that is, and nobody knows what that is. And
Right.
Felix is just a giant ball of PTSD in the way that like you can be fine, but then something can trigger you and you are just catapulted back to that moment when he like falls down the well and becomes very childlike and like mistakes Mildmay for his keeper and calls him keeper, because Mildmay often has to like Felix will just get up and start like walking somewhere, and Mildmay will have to like physically drag him back and hold him down, which happens with the ghosts.
Yeah.
And it's very traumatizing for both of them.
Yeah, that's such a good scene. Also, is that he's done all this work to make this grass maze so the ghosts that he can't see will go, and he sees Felix start for the maze. He's like, I don't know shit about this, but that cannot be a good idea.
Yeah.
And like tackles him, and it's the first time that he realizes, because Felix starts fighting back like an alley cat. He's cussing with the sim side like Kant in his voice, words Mildmay doesn't even know he knows. And they've been traveling together a while now, where he's like, okay, my brother's not all there. Sometimes he's better than others. It's my job to take care of him. This is the first time that Felix has fought him so hard that he's like, he will try to kill me if I like don't put him down real quick as carefully as I can. And he hates that, but he has to do it. And I think that that's also a really interesting, like, complicated exploration of how trauma can manifest and like what it requires to take care of someone sometimes when they are going to hurt themselves, because the ghosts are trying to convince him to walk this maze and die. Like, that's, you can hear the inside of Felix's head. And they promised me I can reunite with this childhood friend who died in the fires. Like, all of these things are in his head that Mildmay doesn't know, but he knows it's bad. And that in this moment, like, he has to do what needs doing to keep Felix safe. And I think that that has a lot of compassion to it. And it also sucks for both of them. It's really horrible that it happens, and it makes Felix even worse, like more unwell. And Mildmay blames himself later when they get to the gardens and everyone assumes he was abusing Felix. And he's like, yeah, I had to, but I did it. I'm a monster. Like, I'm guilty of this. So it's very back and forth on that, on how they deal with what they've had to do. But I do think for the ghosts of it all, that like, that's how we learn history. And I do think it's fun to think of in terms of Monette's like PhD dissertation being on ghosts in like Shakespeare and Marlowe. Like, yeah, obviously, this is going to become this huge theme that is just starting to really blossom in this book, because then when Felix is at the gardens, he discovers the book, The Doctrine of Labyrinths, and he already knows about it, but he doesn't know how he knows. Because it's something he talked about with Gideon, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Because it's like the white-eyed lady, that death goddess that Gideon knows about and he doesn't. And he's so upset by like not knowing how he knows this that he like won't look at it. That's his response. So I think that it sets us up for what comes later with like, oh yeah, there's ghouls, there's ghosts, there's demons. The Cabellines pretend none of this is real, but everyone else knows it is. And that it often reveals something about history or trauma or your past even that you have to look at that hasn't gone away. And I think that's the Gothic tradition coming through, because these are totally like Gothic fantasy novels for sure. Every little element. But I do think this book mostly is setting you up for it, and it doesn't go into it fully yet. It's like, here's all these things. Aren't you curious? Like, what's going on with this? And then we're going to get real far into it later.
And the ghosts are absolutely, in most cases, seem to be like sort of memories of usually pretty bad things. At least that's the ones Felix can see. You know, I don't know if that's his particular curse or that's why ghosts linger. He has there's a brutal moment where he sees a ghost of a woman being raped, and he does not see the rapist, right, in his bed that he's supposed to sleep at in his hotel, right? Yeah. That presumably that happened, and she died in that process. And it's really horrible, and that's maybe the first time he ends up calling Mildmay keeper, actually, is when he runs away from him. And then like Mildmay has to get him back, and like Felix is doing like little smiles at him when he does one nice thing to him or whatever, and Mildmay feels like a piece of shit. But like, it's also one of those, that dynamic between, you know, Felix seeing that memory and seeing something that is there, even though it's hard to interact with, right? Like, and then Mildmay having to deal with it. If you've ever had to deal with somebody who was, you know, in the throes of some kind of psychosis or mania or whatever, or even, you know, just on a lot of like drugs or alcohol, you can know how like there's not really a right choice a lot of the time. And like even like arguing, like, you know, even if you could argue with it, like sometimes they're even saying things that are true. Like I've dealt with people that are like, you know, my job I used to have driving people around. I've dealt with like people who were like freaking out about something that was really bad, but I'm like, okay, how do we deal with this? How do we fix this now? Right. In this moment. And I thought, like, honestly, like there were some moments, especially because Malme has to take Felix on a boat across the water to get to where these healers are. And it's hard because Felix has this fear of water from being threatened, like fucking waterboarded and threatened with being drowned to death as a child. And to get him as the ship is going down to the shore, as Malme is going through like, you know, physical cramping and stuff from this horrible spell that's still on them, this curse, Malme like has to treat him horribly. And I like had to like that one like I had to sit with that because like, you know, I had to deal with once like a friend who was like in the throes of like trying to commit suicide that I had to make physically throw up. And like, yeah, I basically had to fight him, and that fucking sucks. And then you look at it afterwards and I'm like, well, I could have been gentler there or night. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't know what I mean, that's good. But like, if you do, you know what I'm saying. And it's a brutal process that I, again, appreciate this book being extremely straightforward and real about, without, you know, sitting us down and being like, now Malme is a good person actually, because it's like, no, you're just going to trust that the reader is like, you know, competent enough that if they're a person who sat down and read this book and wants to engage with it, that they can engage with it a little further. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, Malme, like he attacks this problem in that very direct fashion. That's, you know, is it indelicate? Sure, but like he articulates really well. At the top of chapter 12, right, when he's talking about this dream that he has about like being stuck in a cooling well, and people are just surrounding him, and they're not helping him or anything. They're not like pulling him out. They're just asking him the weirdest goddamn questions, and it's the point where like, okay, like talking has stopped helping. You need material support in some form or fashion, and however that manifests, so whatever is necessary, he will do. I also find it interesting, like the, you know, on the subject of like ghosts and what Felix sees and doesn't see, like that he sees the woman, the ghost of the woman being raped and murdered, but not the perpetrator, right? That stood out to me, right? Because it speaks to a dynamic, I think, where like people can, in the time like after like a victim has been, you know, victimized and brutalized and made, you know, you can there's this dynamic societally where like you can pity the victim, like you can you know, say that they are a victim, but can't indict the perpetrator, right? The structure or the individual that you know, caused it for one reason or another, be it patriarchy, be it white supremacy or something. It's this lingering, the ghosts are these lingering traces of this, you know, trauma reaching back generations.
The violence inherent in the system.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I think like I agree, Lenore, and I was thinking about this, like the fact that Felix was kind of on top, and then he gets thrown back into the dirt by something that someone does to him, and suddenly he can see all of the violence that is around them. Yeah. And that is the history of this land. And that is suddenly becomes visible to him when it hadn't been visible for a very long time. And I think that is also like, that is like Southern Gothic. That is ghost story. That is like the rotten core of this society is suddenly made visible, and what that means. Like, that is Gothic. Like, and I love that.
Well, and how very, very interesting, right? We've touched on it before, you know, that the Mirador specifically, I mean, obviously, I don't know the class dynamics of like the other societies in this setting, but how very interesting that the Mirador specifically teaches, don't look for ghosts, they're not real. Felix at one point muses that, like, well, the old man who taught me about dreams would not discuss ghosts, right? Don't look outside. Don't look at this obvious lingering scream of some past era. Just seek guidance within yourself. Don't look at people. Don't look at systems. Don't look at
Clean your damn room.
Yes.
He was taught by Jordan Peterson. Oh my God.
Yeah.
To teach you this magic.
Yeah.
And like,
Don't tell me who taught you this.
and like the Mirador doesn't even believe dreams tell the truth either, but like they tell you about it nevertheless, because it's a, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's whatever word that means, like it's a it's deadening, like the sensation, like it's an anesthesia, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit really early on where you know, speaking way back to our, like, what was Felix like before all this, where he chooses to go out and he intends to hire, like, a young prostitute, like a sex worker, that he is explicitly going to, like, enact sadism on.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a moment where the guy who he's procuring from is like, just don't kill him. And there's a moment where I think you realize, like, where the bar is. And I do think that that's the whole book, like, right, the whole series, that I think people struggle with is that it is very honest about, like, where the societal bar actually is. Mm-hmm. It's not, like, comfortable to think about that, but I think if you're someone who has experienced marginalization and repression and violence in these ways, like, you know how low the bar is. You know exactly where it could be, particularly, like, for other, or where it is for other people, and he leaves. Like, that's the moment where he's like, oh, this was me at one point. Like, I can't do this to someone else. Because it's also, I think, significant that he has directed all of his, like, sadism outward in terms of, like, social cruelty. Like, he's a Mean Girls kind of guy, and he is trying to be
darling.
Like, sexually he is trying to be, quote unquote, so normal. And that is often like the shame that he has about his sexuality, that is the buried thing that has to be dug up and actually kind of healed and dealt with and processed. Like, no, there are ways you can do these things that aren't awful, like, for you or the people involved, but how do we get there? And I do think that sort of digging up the nastiness and looking at it and saying, okay, what do we do now, is also how it deals with history and culture and, like, power and empire. That nobody kind of gets an excuse for anything, but that we look at how we got where we are and try to figure out where we could go next that is different. And also the Mirador being a high control, like, religious system is super relevant to that also.
Right. I mean, even the name, the doctrine of labyrinths.
Right.
Like, this idea, like, this doctrinal sort of, like, constant sort of, like, there are these rules and we must follow them. Why? I don't know.
And I think that leads us well into this sort of final, in this book, expression of all these things, where you get to this place Felix has been struggling to get to. He doesn't know quite why, but we know it's a real place. It's gardens with people
Gardens
who are
of
healers.
Something Greek.
Yes. It is. Yeah, it's the house. It's the houses of healing. It's the House of Elrond. You know, basically, yeah, it has, like, at least how he's imagining it. You know, I'm imagining it, this whole book is, like, basically Rivendell, though. Like, but like this oasis of perfection and whatever. But, you know, and you get your maybe.
And if
first
Tolkien
hint.
was writing this, it would be.
Yes, exactly. Refer to our Return of the King episode, also featuring a guest you might know, Aysha Farah. But we, but in this, we get the first sense that it maybe isn't that way when we realize, oh, the people who own that were the invaders of this land at one point. And everyone speaks their language as a result of that. Not that the people who are currently living did that, but you reach this island through, you know, brutal means on both sides, and horrible pain, and literal storms. And on the island, yes, it's a very nice place. It's gardens, it's hospitals. From this book, we don't know a ton about the society, but they at least have this sort of veneer of being enlightened and polite and all that. But,
right. Also, let me just interject really quick. I don't know if we talked about this, but, like, Mildmay has a curse on him that came about because he killed a wizard of the Mirador. Mm-hmm. And the curse has been held back, but now gets attacks him and really fucks his leg up.
Yeah.
on the way.
I think we mentioned it briefly, but it's good to highlight that because we were throwing a lot of stuff at y'all.
Specifically, he killed that Witchfinder general who killed his friend.
Good for him.
Yeah. Cerberus Crescent, I think his name is, which is there's a lot of really good names in this book.
Yeah, you took down Tom Homan. That world's Tom Homan.
Yeah.
And basically getting to this island has been their goal. And we have Malmaid waking up here without Felix, and finding out, he's in pain. He's being taken care of, sort of. But already, the bigotry or whatever is there. They're like, oh, this guy's a scoundrel. He's got a fucking scar on his face. Felix, who is clearly the beautiful, nice guy that we can tell is a magician, was clearly the reason everything's bad for him is because of this guy with a scar. Notwithstanding, if he cared, why did he drag him all this way? Not even considering that. I got this almost European vibe, this hey, we conquered the world and we got a lot of resources and now we're straight chilling. And yeah, we don't necessarily do that anymore, or maybe not. I don't know about this world specifically, but now we can kind of all look enlightened and be cool and look down on everyone else, and we're separate from everyone else.
Yeah, and a lot of the themes of the next book are Felix falling very easily into this world, and Mild may not.
I like that.
And they also they leave that place pretty quickly, but you get a pretty good picture of it, and then that is then reflected when they return to the Mirador, and Felix fits right back into his high class life, and Mild May is just kind of oh, there's his fucking brother with the scar on his face that nobody trusts.
And what is violence and who gets to do violence.
Right.
Systemic violence doesn't count, but Mild May killed a couple of guys who deserved it. So that's the bad kind.
The Gardens give me the vibe, though, not of an American U.S. vibe, but of a small European country type vibe of
the Dutch.
The Dutch, or I was in, I visited France not even too long ago, not a small European country, but even then it's I multiple times people are like, yeah, we're much more enlightened here. And I'm like, maybe in some ways.
They're anyway, time to celebrate Blackface Day.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
I wanted to read just here, maybe it's hard to say favorite, but one of the most effective descriptions of pain in this book, because Felix. Malmaid is feeling this pain in his leg, this horrific pain in his leg. And it says, so he's laying in bed, and it says, on the other hand, I ached all over in that kind of feverish way that means it don't matter what you do. You ain't going to be comfortable this side of tomorrow morning, and maybe not then neither. My head was throbbing like some kind of drum, and my right leg had gone and lapped the field. The swarm of hornets hadn't gotten no smaller, that's describing his leg. They just packed themselves into my hip and thigh and knee like a jar of olives. It felt like if I tried to bend my knee at all, the whole thing would just squish to bits like rotten fruit, and then the hornets would get out and sting me to death. Oh, powers. I was fucked, and fucked bad. I fucking love him.
Yeah. Chronic pain. It's a bitch.
You need to hear his stand-up special.
Yeah, Mild May's so funny. When he just observes people he refers to as flashies, which is rich people, and he says people talking all flash and stuff. He is so scathing. He's as mean as Felix, but in his head.
And usually to the right people. Usually.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
And he, at this point, gets, basically because of who he is, or who they perceive him to be, he gets health care, but they clearly overlook it. And when he complains, his caretaker says, oh, don't complain. And then later on, when it's clear that he didn't heal at all, his caretaker was like, why didn't you say anything?
And he literally did. He said, my leg is not getting better.
Right.
And in fact,
an old man tries to
an old man tries to speak up for him, and they're like, well, that's just some old dude. So that guy gets written off too, even though he's a member of their society, because he's, presumably, to them old or drugged up. Another
example. Consumption, I think.
Yeah, a guy written off.
Or just willing to speak up for this, marginalized person. Suddenly he's in that similar category.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Also, that this is like in the next book, but that horrible guy who compels Mildmay to like answer his questions, Felix starts fucking him.
No.
No. Oh no.
Felix, no.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of sympathy.
Felix's taste in men is abysmal.
Oh
I feel
god.
so much sympathy for him throughout, especially now in my adulthood. But I should have listened closer to my own thoughts about Felix for a chunk there in my 20s. Also worth noting, everyone treats Mildmay like he's older, but he's like almost a decade younger than Felix.
Yes.
Because of the like, oh, he's trade, he's like the roughneck guy, like he's the bruiser, whatever. Like they just treat him as if he's the big brother, the one in charge a lot. Even I think readers forget. Sounds like, no, Felix is the older brother, and he will consistently start referring to Mildmay as his little brother, and it throws people off.
Yeah.
Like throughout.
Also,
There's a
there
racialized element to that too.
later when Felix shows back up with Mildmay and brings him everywhere, tons of people think that they are fucking.
Yes.
Because they can't think of another reason that Felix would keep him around.
Yeah.
Like, surely
And Mildmay consistently has to be like, no, I am not fucking my brother. What the fuck is wrong with you?
And
And then they
especially-
say the "I'm not fucking my brother's" shirt raises a lot of questions.
Well, and especially like if we go, Aisha, with the thesis that that Mildmay is mixed or is some sort of non-white, like there is that extra like dimension of that othering, that exoticizing of you would only be hanging around with this guy if you wanted to like see what it was like,
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Like Ginevra, frankly.
Yeah,
Yep.
like
Yep.
Ginevra,
Yeah.
just like Ginevra.
Uh-huh.
Right. And this is kind of so Mildmay has a love interest later who treats him very differently than Felix and Ginevra treated him. She's very cool. She's one of my favorite characters in the story.
Woohoo!
Good.
Yeah.
Now I really got to read it.
Yeah. Though, like, this story is about Felix and Mildmay's relationship and like their love for each other and like all the weird forms that it takes. Like,
Yeah.
it is kind of a romance, but it's not like sexual.
Yeah. But if you're
Well,
going to date one of them, you kind of are in a relationship with both of them, which causes problems for some people until the end, where some people figure it out.
Right.
That's not a spoiler.
This is a specific thing I don't want to spoil because it's very cool, but they get into a situation that Mildmay's sort of like tendency to ensnare himself in situations where he is being controlled by someone and has to do things. He kind of gets himself into these situations repeatedly on purpose that are like for good reasons, but it is kind of this recurring theme that Mildmay sort of subjects himself to somebody else's will intentionally. And this kind of plays out again and again across the series.
Yeah. We didn't even mention like there's a wizard that he meets like partway through that like he happens to find his way to because of this like calling spell that the wizard does.
Abortion, yeah.
Yeah. And he's
That
just
guy
like,
also sucks.
and he's just like, okay, we'll roll with it.
Yeah, you're the boss. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mildmay needs somebody to tell him what to do.
Mm-hmm.
The book kind of wraps with Mildmay needing Felix, and it takes a minute for Felix to come visit him. And Felix is like, "Oh, I didn't know he wanted to see me," and he's mad at everyone else around him. And like rightfully so, they didn't tell him that Mildmay needed him. But also, like Felix, you could have gone and visited Mildmay. Come on now. But
Mildmay represents all the shit that Felix has run away from in himself.
Which is what makes this ending here so effective. When Felix sits with Mildmay and tells him what happened to him, tells him his story, that he was a kept thief, that he was beaten, that he was drowned, and he says, and then talking about, Malkar, and I just want to read this section. He has told him the story, and Felix is, not doing well. And he says, "I just have to say it. I have to get it out. I reached out with my left hand, and after a moment hesitating, he took it. His hand was square and warm and strong. I gripped it hard and said, my voice barely a whisper, he raped me. He raped me. He raped me and used me to break the virtue and drove me mad and sacrificed me to Stephen. And my breath hitched painfully and I could feel my shoulders hunching, fearing punishment. But I couldn't keep the words silent anymore. The words I had kept locked in the lowest, darkest region of my mind for years. Since Malkar first half seduced, half raped me in that filthy upper room in the Shining Tiger. I said, and I hate him. No fucking wonder, Mildmay said, and I felt tears spill over my eyelids, tears of relief and pain, for I had said it and not died. Mildmay had heard me and did not find me abhorrent. I let go of his hand, rubbed my face, looked at him. The face was stone still, but the green eyes held neither condemnation nor anger. It's okay, he said. I mean, I can't do nothing about it, but it's okay, I said, using the word deliberately. His face brightened in its non-smiling way, and he said, yeah, still brothers, right? Yes, I said, still brothers.
Yeah, it's so good. Also relevant that we didn't mention, he has not told anyone what Malkar did this whole time.
Yeah.
Like, even under compulsion spells, under interrogation of all kinds, when he was mad, like all of that, he will not tell anyone what has been done to him because he's so ashamed of it. And he doesn't want anyone's pity either, which I think is one of the most realistic like elements of like how one deals with sexual trauma in this series, is that Felix has such a hard time expressing what has happened to him.
I also think that it's very interesting that it's not the thing that is very hard for him to say. The hardest is not he raped me. It's I hate him.
Yeah.
And that is so Christian. That is so like, you're not allowed to feel bitterness for the people that have hurt you. It is so like straight out of evangelical, like the worst thing, you can feel is anger. You must forgive this person who has hurt you. And I thought that is so effective.
I would refer people to either Bob Jones University or Focus on the Family's workshops for how to deal with sexual assault in a young person.
Yep.
Both of them, and these are widely used, say, make sure they say the girl, because they very rarely even acknowledge it can happen to boys, does not feel bitterness for their accuser or their abuser, and that they so they know that also is a sin, just like the sin that was committed to them, right? I raise this because like this is this is relevant now, and it certainly was relevant in 2005. That's the shit that this does to people, and it's that element of like, I can't feel bitterness, that's wrong, or that reflects on me somehow or shows my own weakness. And it's also because of like the obsession, the worshipfulness he has towards Malkar, because he was groomed in the very literal sense.
I also think that it's interesting that when in the very beginning, when he goes to Malkar, he goes to him consensually. Like the first time they have sex, he's drunk. He's on Phoenix, the drug. But he drank it. He drank the wine knowing it was in it. The first time they have sex is technically consensual. Yeah. And like, he has consensually had sex with Malkar a lot. Like, he started having sex with him when he was a teenager. So like, by our standards, it was not consensual. It was statutory rape. But in Felix's eyes, what has happened to him is he has been raped by someone he has consensually had sex with before, which is a thing that didn't even used to be illegal here. Like, marital rape was not illegal for a very long time, and in some societies still is not. Like,
and there are people here in the United States working on changing that back.
Right. Like, this idea that if you have had consensual sex with someone, they cannot rape you after that. And like, I think it's very deliberate that this story begins with a consensual sex act and then goes further than that. Because like, that is another thing. Felix, and I'm doing this in scare quotes, brings a lot of this on himself. Like, he kicks this off by going to Malkar. And I think that then I think adds to his shame and his like inability to talk about what happened to him, because he's terrified that people are going to be like, well, yeah, of course. Like,
and he definitely knows it's self-harm. Like, in the moment when he is doing it, he is looking it square in the face of like, why not? Like, my life is falling apart. This will feel bad, but it will feel like something I can control. I know exactly what will happen to me if I go to him. And, like, that's really messy, and I think it's very real. But it does a real complexity to the idea of, like, consent as a binary situation. Like, it sure is uglier than that.
Even when he's, like, assaulting him, like, in the scene where he breaks the virtue, at first he's like, I can deal with this. I have had stuff like this happen to me before. I think the exact words are, I know how to deal with violent intercourse. But then he starts doing stuff to his magic too, and he can't handle that. Because it's like, it goes at the core of him. But, like, just like the fact that this person has internalized so much shame and thinks of himself as, like, not a victim, really. Like, Felix, I think through a lot of it just thinks of himself as like, well, of course I'm worthless. Why would anyone trust me? Why would anybody believe me?
He literally says that about Shannon. Why does this person want me?
Yeah. Right. And when like Shannon wants him back and he can't bring himself to have sex with him, and he just kind of like, and Shannon gets so mad about it, and calls him a bastard. Which
Shannon
is like now
more mad that Felix won't fuck him than like Felix hit him one time. You know what I mean? The thing that maybe he has more justification to be mad about, but like he's more like, what do you mean you won't fuck me? Like,
yeah, Shannon sucks. Like, Shannon sucks throughout the series.
Shannon is very much an evil twink, like in a very specific way.
Yeah.
Oh God, but yeah, like it's tied up in so much. I mean, it's this paradigm that Felix and Malkar exist within, right? Felix is the subject of this, unambiguous act of grooming, this very coercive relationship. And it's spelled out by Mildmay again in the introduction, right? Most half-bright folks can see the problem. Some hocuses were so powerful and so nasty that I guess it seemed like it was better to go ahead and do the obligation dumb with a hocus you sort of trusted than to go wandering around waiting for a different hocus to get the drop on you, right? This is compet under patriarchy, right? This is sticking to, a guy that, he might slap you around, but he's going to protect you from the guys that would murder you. Right. And that's
when Malkar gives Felix up to Steven, as an excuse to get away. And like, Felix is shocked by this because he's like, I know our game. Like, I still kind of thought we were doing our game in this like way almost that like Malkar is a bad dom. And like, and Felix thinks he knows the rules because this is like a dynamic that he's used to. But then Malkar completely betrays that because he's like, no, even though you did everything I asked of you, I'm still betraying you.
Because even though, like, it's abusive and it hurts Felix, but he at several points, he says, like, he goes back to this because it's familiar. You're exactly right, because he knows the rules, and now there are no rules.
Right.
And the book ends with the brothers sitting together, and Mildmay needs to sleep, and the last line is "Sleep well, little brother," from Felix to Mildmay. And this is so unresolved. There's so much that's unresolved, and of course, there's 3 more books, so that's fine.
Yeah, 3 books of Mildmay and Felix like getting into the nastiest fights you've ever seen people get in. They're so mean.
Yeah,
there's
a couple of those.
But I think that it is also, and this is something that I've talked about before. I always like when a book that is clearly a book in the series still is a self-contained thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's harder for like a second or a third to, but especially a first in a series. And I think this does stick the landing well by like, there is an arc that is completed, and we are at a stopping point on this island. There is questions unresolved, but like we have tied up what this book is in a bow with more to come. And I think that it does that very effectively and finds that stopping point with Mildmay going to sleep. And he'll wake up and more will come. But I think it's really cool. I think it's really effective. I think it's really brutal. And, you can, if you want to go over this book with a fine tooth comb, I'm sure you can find things to complain about. I could have done without the septads that confused me. But there was one line where he says septad 4 times in a paragraph, and I was like, But all that to say, but like what it's doing here is so effective and so cool. And this was her first novel, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
She
I was
wrote it
reading
when she
it
was like in
again,
her
like,
early 20s, right? While doing a doctorate. Insane.
Yeah. I
Crazy.
was literally texting one of my buddies who also loves this, like, I wish my brain could do that now. I think
Right.
I'm pretty good at my job, but I can't do this. Like, and
Yeah.
again, she was so young. It's like, God damn, all right.
Also, like these books are so emotionally complex and ahead of their time in a way that like shocked me. Like
Yeah.
so for these books both feel extremely contemporary, like they could have been written last year, and like they're from the 90s because they're in this sort of like Jacqueline Carey, Cushiel's Dart sort of like sex fantasy kind of era, but they're so grounded. And I also, we've talked about this, Lee, before, that like there's so many like romance and fantasy book tropes that these books sort of back into sideways so like cleverly that you don't even see them coming, and then suddenly they're like, and there's only one bed, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
but they come at them in such like a grounded, like normal, as I keep saying, way that they don't hit as like harlequin romance tropes.
Right.
Yeah. There was this, I was going to say a quote that I'm going to steal. I was looking at my notes. The recent Ocean Vuong book that just came out, The Emperor of Gladness, he did a podcast talking about the way people don't react well to sincerity and earnestness or that groundedness. And there is a thing that he said about what he thinks like art should do, novels should do. And it was engaging in the world without judgment. Like you just are looking at who these people are, what the systems around them are. You're exploring their relationships, like how those are shaped without judgment. And it's not that is this good or bad, it's how does it work, what is it doing. And I really think that's what I want out of all books. And I get really annoyed when it seems like it's an evangelical morality play, which is sort of the hell we are trapped in now in a lot of genre spaces. So I do think that, yeah, that's why they also to me feel very contemporary in what they're doing, especially as gay books. Like, wow. But also that very 90s, like, no, we were doing that more then. Like treating sex as a reasonable subject for like anything else. It's a driver of a lot of people's lives and relationships. It can be bad, it can be good, it can be ugly, it can be beautiful, it can be messy, it can be all those things at once. And I think it's really nice to go back to them and be like, oh, I remembered that right. Like these are very open in their engagement with all these topics without sort of judgment on the page or explaining themselves to you. It just expects you to be a grown up and like be able to deal with the material where you're at.
Well, if I had one pitch for this book, it would be when it came back out, they should have made the cover one of those cutesy book talk covers that at the front has the like enemies to lovers. The trope. I'm sure that would have gone over great.
Lee loves that.
I think that's really funny, and it should be. Is that his brother? Yeah. Don't worry about it.
By sheer
I
coincidence,
in different ways.
By sheer coincidence, one of the Audible narrator for the audiobooks, I was looking this up, is one of the narrators in the cast of the ACOTAR audiobooks.
I don't know that. I'm not familiar with that.
Like the what was it? The what does it even stand for? Court of Thorns and Roses, like the Sarah J. Maas stuff.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, the fairy smut.
Yeah, I think like these books are very, let's use the word, problematic. And that word gets flung around a lot, I think, to make gay people shut up. To make people of a certain, I don't know, like this idea that if we simply don't write about sexual violence, it will go away. If we just don't talk about it. If we, like, I don't know, this sort of idea that like if, like this sort of like Christian as usual, like thought crime. Like if we are speaking evil into the world by engaging with reality. And I think that is so, and you can feel that in books when you read contemporary fiction. I feel like so often I read a book and I'm like, I can tell this person is terrified of being called out on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I hate that. And it will make me put a book down. And it's why I put down 80% of books that I pick up now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
there's no difficulty allowed. Like none of that human difficulty.
I'll say, while there may be pop culture, maybe want gays to shut up. We do not want gays to shut up here at the Socialist Shelf. I have one thing for the end here, but before I get into that, will you say one more time? Tell us one more time about this collection that y'all have put together, and if you have any final thoughts on the book as well, throw that out there.
Yeah, Amplitude: Stories of Trans and Queer Futurity. It's really cool. A lot of cool contributors. There's probably something for you no matter what kind of story you like. And there will probably be a couple where you're like, hadn't thought about that way. In a way that I think blends with our discussion of Mélusine and the Doctrine books. Because I think I do tend to value stories that think about sexuality and embodiment and trauma recovery in all of these ways that I think this text does. There's a through line through my work, I would say, as an editor, as a writer, as a scholar, of like sometimes like pain and projection and bad feelings that we have about gender, sexuality, living in a society are really worthwhile and vital and are what makes us like part of a society together in our relationships, and that retreating from them and retreating from discomfort can tend to become really fashy in a really uncomfortable way. Very Sarah Schulman, conflict is not abuse sort of running through there.
Yeah.
But definitely the sex parts. I would say I think I am well known for being a little horny in most of my work, is that like sexuality itself can really lend to personal exploration of gender, of relationships, even when it's not working out. And I think there's a handful of stories and Amplitudes that are doing fun stuff with desire and bodies and what we do and don't do with them, particularly as trans people, in a way that's really neat, I think.
The orgasm doula in particular, like that story early on, like it's very short and sweet, and it's a really, really good meditation on like figuring out how your body works.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly thought a lot about, just since we started this, I didn't know how to work it in, so I'll work it in now. If either of you have read the quarterly from the 1920s Fire from the Harlem Renaissance, I thought about that, they were like, hey, a lot of, at that time, like black media was like, let's write propaganda so white people won't be racist towards us. And a lot of people at the Harlem Renaissance were like, that's not our fault that they're racist towards us. If we want to talk about stories of us being humans, we'll talk about stories of us being humans. And I think that's an important lesson for us to learn. And that's a lesson that has been learned and unlearned to different degrees by different marginalized communities. And we're in a pretty bad rut of that on all fronts right now.
Yeah.
But the queer
long
community
20th century.
I think like, I think about this a lot in that, like, I have a person I know a friend who I remember she said that she doesn't like the show Hannibal, which is my favorite show. And she says the reason that she doesn't like it is because of the way that it does the evil gay European seducing the straight man trope. And she's like, I know that that's just, a part because he grew up watching Hays Codes era movies and Brian Fuller is extremely horny for that. But she's like, straight people are going to think that's okay. And I'm like, I don't care what straight people think.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Fuller is not making that for straight people. He is making it for his libido and for me. And everybody. It's not for you. Like,
absolutely. And I'll say, to our like two straight listeners, if you get Amplitudes and you enjoy it, then you get extra points. You're actually this Pride Month's top ally. Right. So even though this will not come out during Pride Month.
Oh, if you can hang, it's cool. As long as you can hang, like, and be cool.
You can hang, exactly.
Yeah, I think really what it comes down to is the spectrum for me is not really gay or straight. It's can you hang or can you not hang?
Hell yeah, love that. And on that note, Aysha, you have come on 5 of these episodes. You absolutely can hang. We actually have a small gift for you that we wanted.
For me?
Yes, we do. I'm gonna see if this is gonna work. Okay, so prerequisite here. I thought about this, and I talked with Tay Wispy Witch, the artist for our cover art, and I was like, Aisha's been on 5. I think she needs her own socialist shelf bust for the.
What?
So there it is.
Guys, oh my god!
So Tay whipped that up for us. Tay's also been on a couple episodes, so check those out. But
We
just
put it in
we'll put them. It'll put it somewhere in the episode art, so folks will have seen it already when they watch this. But we
Oh my
thought,
God.
you've been on 5 times, so you needed your own figure for the cover art. So there you go.
This is so cute.
Mhm.
I'm sending
Oh,
it
yeah.
to Lee right now.
I've got my phone open. I'm ready.
Oh, she's so
Yes.
pretty. She has the
Excellent.
fucking outfit falling off her shoulder because that's all my shirts sluttily show one bra strap. This is so great, you guys. Thank you so much. I'm gonna cry.
Aw.
Of course.
More literary figures need fashion.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Oh
that's
my God.
to fit the theme of our episode art there.
That's
So
so sweet.
thank you, Aisha, for coming on so many times, and this has been so much fun. Thank you, Lee, for coming on. This has been an absolute blast. And yeah, I'm gonna just say one more time. It's fine for gay people not to shut up.
Yeah.
Also,
Agree.
read Lee's other books.
Yes,
I'm a
yeah.
huge Lee fangirl, especially Summer Sons is my favorite
Mhm.
one. I love that book. If you want to
Mhm.
see terrible boys driving cars,
Let's go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dealing poorly with grief and sexual desire.
yeah, and you can check all the Goodreads reviews, which are there's too many drugs in this.
There's so little drugs in it compared to real life.
There's a little bit of cocaine. Ooh.
Yeah. Imagine if Hillbilly Elegy was good. Drugs.
I'd rather not.
No, I'm kidding. It's not like
Yeah.
that at all. I'm teasing. Just Appalachia and drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I thought about
yeah.
6 different sentences I can't legally say on the podcast. We hate that guy.
Oh God, so much.
I can't believe the first Magic player in the White House is that fucking prick.
That's
Just Dance
fucking
fans.
guy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so much. So appreciate y'all so much, and yeah, we're gonna keep it going. So yeah, read some problematic fiction, read Amplitudes, read Lee's other work. Give Aisha a job.
Yes.
Please give me a job. God damn it.
And if you're if you're a studio exec listening to this, I know there's so many of you.
Yeah.
And y'all have a good one. Peace.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.